Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio, your host for this week's program, and we're talking about the stories that are making headlines with some of the journalists that are covering those stories. And joining me at the table this week, we've got Vanessa Fayz from 9 and 10 News. Welcome back,
Hi,
Vanessa.
thanks for having me.
And Pat Sullivan from Northern Express. Pat, thanks for coming in.
Hi, Bill.
Appreciate you guys spending some time with us, and we wanted to talk about, I guess, really the big story of the week, the last 7 days, has been the arrest of Traverse City Mayor Mike Estes for alleged drunk driving. Pat, just kind of give me your perspective on that. As I think we all came into the daily news briefing on, was it last Thursday morning?
Last Thursday, yeah.
Waiting to see what they would present us with.
I guess some people had heard about it already. I hadn't heard about it. So I just got this press release that described this fairly ordinary drunk driving arrest that was, did you guys read the press release?
Yeah.
I mean, and I looked at the press release and I was like, why are they handing this out? Like, I didn't, because it was just something that would happen every day, and then somebody said, oh, it's the mayor, and then so, okay.
It was strange too, because the press release was kind of, normally we sit down, we have a conversation with the police that morning, and this one was just kind of thrown down a few minutes ahead of schedule, and then nobody was there to talk to us that day, and it was just a little odd.
That morning they did not want to answer questions.
Yeah. So take me through, I guess, your reaction, Pat, to learning it was the mayor, and then what you do, what we all do to try to kind of get some information, because it seemed a little challenging at first, the first few hours at least.
Yeah, well, I had a little bit more time. I think other people wanted to get it out that morning, like right away. I had the day to kind of let it work its way into court and figure it out that way. But it was odd because at first nobody wanted to say anything, and then once we all knew it was Estes, then it was pretty clear that Estes was going to have to say something, because the election is, 14 days away? No, 12 days away.
12 days away at that time.
And so what's he going to do? And then he was making a comment almost right away about it.
It was a challenge, I think, to try to not only get a hold of him, whether or not he was answering his phone. Obviously wasn't checking email right away, but then to kind of go through the court system, because as you said, we get DUIs every day, and we don't always rush down to court to figure out who it was. But this one was a little different. We were trying to confirm that it was in fact the mayor. The court, we went over to district court that morning. I went over there with Marissa from 9 and 10, and then the Matt from the Record Eagle, and we were trying to confirm the arrest, and when's he going to be arraigned and all this stuff, and they didn't even have a court file on him yet. So we were waiting for,
and then it was confirmed
the actual paperwork
through the
prosecutor's office. He had bonded out in the middle of the night, which seemed a little unusual to us.
I don't know about that. I don't know whether or not that is unusual. Do you
I
know
don't
whether
know
that
either.
is?
It just seemed unusual.
I think once, I think once your blood alcohol level goes down to a level that you can, then.
And I think you're right. I think it seemed unusual because so often when we do get those kinds of press releases, so and so is still in jail awaiting arraignment.
Right, because
so-and-so is still here.
It's something different that they're not going to let him out until they see a judge.
So we're like, why is there no arraignment? So then this is a case where arraignment is now a week away still. It's next week, Monday. So we were it was a kind of a holding pattern. Vanessa, kind of just give me your take on the whole situation. Obviously, yesterday, Wednesday, the mayor made a statement outside the governmental center to kind of address the media and the public as well, finally.
And he did say that he's running again, correct?
Right.
And I think that's a good thing. I think it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, because anything could really happen with this. But I think it'll be also interesting to see how this affects the community. But I don't think that something like this should, cause someone to not run again.
Well, it seems interesting too that it's almost perfectly primed now for the voters to make the decision.
Yeah, exactly.
He can kind of take the decision out of his hands in a sense.
Right.
and just let the people decide.
Mm-hmm.
Pat, what struck you about, if anything, about that event yesterday outside the governmental center?
I thought we were sent a mixed message. He said he was apologetic, and he said he was going to work on, he was going to let it happen again, and he was going to work on regaining trust and forgiveness. He said that he is going to stay in the race. He wants to be mayor, but then he wouldn't answer any questions. And if he's going to be mayor, and if he's going to be accountable to the people, then why not take questions? I mean, I could have understood it if he would have said, and I was kind of thinking, based on some stuff I'd heard earlier, that he was going to take questions then and then not address that anymore. Then
Right.
okay, then it'll be done. But to not take any questions, I thought, I mean, I understand that in cases where somebody has a criminal case against them, sometimes they'll say, well, because of the what's going on in court, I don't want to comment right now. But in this case, clearly, he's going to plead guilty. Clearly, he's going to have to, he's not going to file, he's not going to try to get this charge dismissed. There's not going to be a trial. He
said, I admit that I'm guilty.
He's admitted his guilt, so I didn't understand why he wouldn't take questions.
That kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
It was interesting to me when I read, and he had informed the media before he went and made the announcement that this will be brief. So actually, I was reading this thinking maybe he's resigning.
And he read
That's what it gives off,
That's
I
what
think.
it sounded like to me too, yeah.
He read a prepared statement that could have been sent out as an email. We didn't have to all go out there. And I mean, I understand it was an opportunity to get video and take pictures, but without taking questions, then he's not going off script. He's reading exactly what he's written down. He could send that out to email.
Right. He could have done that.
Yeah, it was interesting because that's what I would think is if you're going to make a public statement and you're not going to take any questions, doesn't that come off to you like I'm not going to run anymore, or I'm stuck having to run, but if and when I win, I will step. That's what I thought he was going to say. So I was shocked when I heard that he said, I'm sorry, and I am still running for mayor. I thought, well, then why couldn't
you ask questions?
It was strange. That was a little weird.
It was interesting, though. It showed how polite, I think it showed how polite the Northern Michigan media was to be there at the thing yesterday. Because if this would have happened anywhere else, he said he's not going to take questions, but then when the thing ends, you see everyone
started shouting.
And it's like, okay, he's not going to take questions.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
So nobody did that, and I guess we're just all polite.
And it was frustrating because, I was of the mindset that at some point you've got to answer questions, especially if you win. I mean, we're not going to go to a ribbon cutting downtown or talk about the latest downtown development project. And well, before we talk about what you want to talk about, Mayor, let's resolve this issue from October, which you still haven't addressed. And this is something that's going to be in the media, in the news, in the paper for the next several weeks at least, as this all gets resolved in the court system. So he's not going to be able to avoid it. So how are we going to...
I think he thinks he can avoid it. I think that's what he thinks.
I think it's one of those things where obviously it's embarrassing to the normal person who just gets a DUI. That's never, that can't be a fun thing to have to admit or whatever. So I think maybe he's just so embarrassed. I mean, and he is. He even said, he told our media that he's so embarrassed and he feels like he embarrassed his family, his city, himself. And so I think it's kind of like that. But the thing is when you're in public office, you have to expect questions. So I feel like it's just you just have to expect it.
And I'm kind of torn too. I mean, at some point, you just, as a journalist, you just accept the fact that he's never going to answer the question, and does that mean you don't ask? Because he has yet to really address the specifics of the incident, and I don't necessarily think those questions should be out of bounds.
Right.
I mean, it's not like we're talking about something from 1992 or 1986. I mean, this is last week, so it's still, people still have questions, and obviously it's still going to be in the courts.
Yeah, and I mean, I hate to say it, but when you are in the position of that nature and you get behind the wheel and you're over the limit and you get caught, you're kind of putting it out there for us to be able to ask. So it isn't out of bounds.
No, I think, it would have been a great opportunity for him to take all the questions, and then from that point in the future, he could have said, well, I've already answered all these questions.
Right.
But at this point, he has not answered the questions.
And I think, too, it sets himself up for maybe more public scrutiny to say, you still haven't answered the questions, or just by nature of saying I'm not going to answer any more questions, it kind of sheds a negative light on. I mean, so just some of the comments I've seen on social media too. Just
Right.
He's not talking about this.
Right.
Or
Maybe he
what's
thinks
more?
an apology is enough. You know, he's admitting guilt. He says I'm sorry, and maybe in his head he thinks that's enough. But we have questions.
It's also been said that he doesn't have necessarily a quote unquote strong candidate opposing him on the ballot, and perceptibly the thought process may be, I don't think I have anything to worry about, so why make it worse by throwing out this quote or this soundbite that could come back to bite me? I don't know if
That could be
Yeah.
true.
that's part of it too.
Maybe he'll address it after. Who knows? It's going to be interesting, I think, to see how everything kind of.
There's the other gray area in all this is, I mean, in theory, he could still resign after the election.
Right. Right.
I think some people think that's what the plan is right now.
Right. Which seems just a little, I don't know, shady to me if that's what he's thinking, because then it's up to the city commission to appoint somebody who's not on the ballot, not running for
Right.
mayor.
It seems that it's saying, I think some people think at this point, like, let's have somebody else be mayor, but not Rick Buckhalter, who's the other
Who's
person who's on
running,
the
right.
ballot.
So that kind of takes the decision out of the voters' hands, which again is something I would want to ask the mayor about in context of this drunk driving arrest. The other thing that has jumped out at me about this, and then we'll move on. Jim Carruthers, city commissioner, always easy to talk to, always friendly with the media, but so much so with this case. I mean, he's gone on record in the last week. I've smelled alcohol on the mayor's breath. Substance abuse is a problem. The mayor needs to go get help. I mean, all of these things that it's almost a leap of presumption to say he needs to get treatment. And
Yeah, I have, my feeling on that is, I mean, it's not like this happens all the time to him, and I just think I think it's interesting when people, and not just in this case, people do it a lot with several different cases that happen when it comes to drinking and driving, or incidents where the person is drunk. They just jump right to, they need to get help. You know, I mean, just because he got pulled over doesn't necessarily mean he's an alcoholic and needs help. So I thought it was interesting that he was just going on record saying that, you know, because no one really knows. Maybe he does, but how do we know?
As a journalist, I really like Jim Carruthers and the way he approaches talking to the media.
Yeah.
He's candid, unfiltered. He says what's on his mind. I think he's a great guy to talk to when a story like this happens. And he's that way. I found he's that way with just about any story. A lot of times it's just, you know, you're not listening so keenly because this one is just, yeah, he's got a lot of interesting things to say, but this is a much more there's a lot more controversy surrounding this story, so you notice a lot more.
Right.
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
It's so refreshing compared to a lot of politicians who you talk to, and they're so guarded, and they're thinking about it so much that they go completely in the other direction, and it's hard to get them to say anything that you could use in a story.
Right. I think you're right. Well, let's take a minute, shift gears, Pat. You've been working on another story within the court system about a gentleman who's basically supposed to help the court system, and it turned out to kind of be quite the opposite in terms of some of the job that he has to do. Kind of explain that to us. What's been going on with this story?
This was the company that was responsible for doing drug testing and alcohol testing for the 86th District Court in Traverse City. Some of the probation officers became suspicious of one particular woman who was supposed to be getting tests, and they heard that she wasn't getting tested for alcohol use every day. So they went to the man who's only 31 years old, who had just started this company a year or so prior, thinking that they would get the records and they would find out whether or not she'd been taking the test and whether or not she could get into trouble. When they approached him, they got suspicious about his reaction, because he was somebody that they knew, somebody that worked with the court often, but he was kind of evasive. He didn't respond to them the way they thought, and they became suspicious of him, and they wound up getting the records and finding that they had been forged, and that the sign-in sheets where this woman had supposedly signed in for her, I think they were morning PBT tests. They've been altered after the fact.
So what was in it for him?
So that at first when you see this, you think, oh well, there must have been an affair or there must have been something. But apparently, and I've checked around, apparently he just felt bad for her. I mean that's I guess what the consensus is of the people who know this case, that he just felt bad for her and he made a really dumb mistake. I guess thinking that he could let somebody slide on testing, and I'm trying to Gubbins, and I'm trying to think of his first name. I think
it escapes me.
His last name was Gubbins. He had been working with the court for a few years at least. He'd been part of the sobriety court team. He had worked for a company that had previously done this testing, and then that's how he kind of got in a position to. He had a good thing going, and he kind of threw it all away.
So what's the latest now on this case?
Last week, last Friday, he had been charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to obstruct justice. He pled guilty to obstruction of justice, which is a 5-year felony. I think they pretty much had him. His lawyer made some arguments about suppressing evidence because the court didn't have the right to go into his house and to take these boxes of sign-in sheets and stuff. But he was basically a contract employee with the court, and the court didn't buy that, and so I don't think he had much of a defense. Yeah. So that he pled guilty pretty much as charged.
Gotcha. Vanessa, let's turn back over to you because I know you've got a kind of a follow-up to a long-standing story in the courts. A name we haven't heard in a few months at least, Jensen Schwander, Robert Jensen Schwander, convicted in the murder of Carly Lewis a couple of summers back. But he's been sentenced a couple of times now, and we're going back for third time's a charm.
Round 3, yep. He went into court for a motion hearing on Friday, basically asking the judge that was appointed after his first judge was asked to recuse himself, and he was asked to disqualify himself from the case. However, this is Judge Rogers. He said, no, he said, I don't think there's a reason for me. Basically, in talking to Schwander's attorney, they feel that these two judges, Powers and Rogers, have been working in the circuit together for too long. And they worry that that's going to cause some sort of bias, I guess, with this sentencing. So they want this to go out of the circuit, I think was their original plan. However, when Judge Rogers told them that he would not disqualify himself from the case, at that point they weren't sure what they were going to do. It'll either just go on the 22nd of November, or they'll file another appeal and try to go out of the circuit and have this which would start the whole thing over from completely beginning, which it's just crazy. A really long
This is a case kind of like with Jim Carruthers, where the attorney Craig Elhart has been fairly helpful in not only talking to the media but kind of explaining to us what's going on, because a lot of the legal stuff, at least for me, a lot of that's just really complicated.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So he's another one of those good ones that can kind of just tell you this is why
I'm doing it, right?
I don't remember the specifics. I mean, I was in the courtroom for most of the Schwander trial. I don't remember the specifics, but I do remember at sentencing thinking, wow, this seems like a really stiff sentence. I mean, the judge was going through all the sentencing guidelines, and then he was tacking on years or points for this, and tacking on points for this, and it was just over and over again. So the sentence grew to, what was it, 70 years? Or
38 to 70. Well, first it was 40 to 70, and then he was told by the Court of Appeals he was exceeding the guidelines, so he knocked it down 38 to 70. And from what I know, he had made a comment about hoping the Court of Appeals is happy with that second sentencing, and that wasn't pleasing to them, so that's when they asked him to get off of the case. And now they have this new judge that's appointed to handle it on November 22nd, and he says that Judge Power and him have never had an in-thorough discussion about this. They've never talked about it other than in passing. How's it going? Is everything on schedule? That's it. So he says, I shouldn't have any problem giving Schwander a fair sentencing. So we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting to see if Elhart decides to try to get this out of the circuit or just kind of goes with it and hopes for the best. We'll see.
It's one of those, I think, that, obviously, we've talked about this before, that so many different people and families are affected. Schwander is or was, 18 at the time, so, an adult, a man, but still a teenager,
right?
A classmate. So there was just a lot of student interaction, a lot of family involvement, and so a really emotional case still.
Yeah, it is. I think too for Carly's family, it's got to, you just want this to end, and it's just a constant reminder that keeps coming, and I think that's got to be hard for her mother and father. So I think that they're looking forward to this just being over.
All right, Pat, let's shift back over to you. Lighter topics. This week's Northern Express, we've got the Iceman, which cometh once again this year. So tell us what the front page story is this week.
I had an interview with Steve Brown, a Q&A, and he's a really interesting guy, a really fun guy to talk to. He started this thing, 26 years ago. I'm not sure exactly what. Sounds right. 24, something like that. Just an informal race between, get on your mountain bikes in Kalkaska and ride to Timber Ridge and Traverse City. And it's a cool ride, and they do it at a time of year when maybe it's going to be snowing and miserable, or maybe it's going to be like 60 degrees out and sunny.
You just never know.
You never know. So, and this thing has become so popular. I mean, I don't know if you want to sign up for this, you have to, the day online registration opens, you have to be there and start clicking within the first minutes. Otherwise, you're not going to. Otherwise, there's going to be 4,000 people ahead of you who get in. And I've been to I've never done the race, but I've been to the Iceman Expo, the kind of this big marketplace that they set up a day before, where they've got all this bike gear and stuff for sale. And it's amazing to see the people who come out for this. I mean, you see people from all over the world. It's just it's a phenomenon, and it's a really cool thing that happens here in northern Michigan.
I think it's one of those that people seem to want. They seem to want snow. They seem to want nasty weather, and that's part of the reason they come. They're kind of hoping for it.
I think so. I think and especially if you go out there, you'll see guys with and gals with those fat tire bikes, and they're obviously hoping for snow.
Right.
And so sure, I think it makes it a tougher thing to do. It makes it more challenging.
As a reporter who's covered that race before, on the day of the race with a camera on my shoulder, I kind of like it when it's the 60-degree weather.
Yep.
And it's
too.
decent out. But yeah, you can just tell. I mean, people are gearing up. There's almost a sense of disappointment if it's 50 degrees and sunny. Kind of disappointed about that. So it's good stuff. And Pat, tell us again what's up next week. You've got another story, obviously, that you're working on for the next issue.
Yeah, I think a pretty interesting story. Another Q&A next week with a blogger who I found as I was working a while back. You might remember there was a guy named David Lee Hunter back, I think, in November or December of last year. His name came up because the Traverse City Police arrested him. He rented a house on, I think, Wadsworth, and then he rented it for 1 month, and then he put it on Craigslist, and he rented it out. He had 6 different people sign leases to rent it, and I think collected thousands of dollars. And so I thought that was just a little interesting story that I just wrote a little thing about, and
And he didn't own the house.
He didn't own the house, no. He rented it for a month, but he was pretending as though he acted as though he owned it. So then I continued following it later on when I checked on the file and I saw that he had split town. So I just did an update to say that he was supposed to appear at a circuit court hearing, and he skipped town. And then I got a call from him a little while after that, and he wanted me to do a correction about my story because he had this long explanation about why everything in the story was wrong. He was calling me from California. He said he had this convoluted reason why he couldn't come back to Traverse City and face the charges. This is a complicated story. So anyway, he brought up this blogger in this conversation that I had with her, and so and I had already. I can't remember exactly the sequence of events, but anyway, throughout the course of this, I became familiar with this blog, and she was following him, and she was attracting all these people who were like saying, "Oh, I know him. Like I live in Vancouver, Canada, and he ripped me off. Or I know him. I live in Hawaii, and he ripped me off. Or I live in..." And then she started following him around and like following him to California, to Hawaii. He was setting up a concert in South Africa with Chris Brown and Nicki Minaj, and he was doing all this crazy stuff, and just
all of it illegitimate.
Well, I mean, he's like on his Facebook, like I'm putting like. I guess you have to draw your own conclusions. So anyway, she followed him to Hawaii, to California, then through Facebook's, and his Facebook was private, but people are sending her screen captures of his Facebook, and she finds that he's in Chicago, finds the hotel that he's at in Chicago. She's already in contact with the Traverse City Police, and she's forwarding this to them, and then once he visited Chicago, I think they had the Marshal Service or something go get him, and then all of a sudden he was back in Traverse City. So I just thought it was an interesting story about how this blogger helped
catch him.
Help keep track of where he was.
Wow, that's interesting. Next week's issue, right?
Yep.
All right. 60 seconds, Vanessa, put you on the spot, but we've got Halloween tonight, thunderstorms in the forecast, winter around the corner. What are you looking forward to most or least about winter weather stories? Because you're used to those too, just like the rest of us. You get to go out in it.
Yeah, trucking around in snow is not fun for me. It is just, it makes everything so much harder, and you have to leave earlier, and then
Deadlines
you still
get
don't know
tighter.
I think that's what it is. It's slipping and sliding, so you have to leave to allow yourself enough time to drive slow and be safe. Then your deadline is shorter and shorter. I just don't like winter. I'm ready for it to go away already.
My least favorite was always, state police have issued a travel advisory. No one go out on the roads. Everybody off the streets. The weather's terrible.
And
Bill, you're out. Go cover that story. On the side of the road, and that's your job for the day. What?
Yeah, that's the fun part.
I get to look forward to that. All right. Vanessa, thanks for coming in.
Thanks
Vanessa
for having
Fayz
me.
from 9 and 10, and Pat Sullivan from Northern Express. Thank you for being with us again
Bill.
as well. And I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio News. Thanks for tuning into the briefing room this week. We'll see you again next time right here.